Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Cush. Welcome to the Miracle Larry podcast, where I'm joined by best friend Larry Kelly. And today we have a special guest. Larry, why don't you introduce our guest?
Hi, Jack. How are you?
Excellent.
I'm excited about today, but I'm a little tired, as you well know. We had a very wild weekend. Jack.
Don't tell the audience about. All right, go ahead.
But I'm really excited about today. We're sort of copying from Jason Bateman's podcast. And we have surprise guests, and today we have Jessica Montanaro. And Jessica is our podcast today is going to be. We take different angles on COVID, and this is all going to be about the nurses' experience. And there's no one better to talk about the nurses than Jessica. She's been doing it for a while. She's I to tell you how long she's been a nurse, I don't know specifically other than what I can repeat from newspaper articles, but I'll let her tell you that. But Jessica was my admitting nurse, and very influential in COVID, in nursing, and big with the union and nurses' rights, and what the nurses went through during COVID. And so Jessica, we're going to throw questions at you, and you just go. But this is Jessica Montanaro.
Hi.
Jessica, we're delighted to have you here. I met Jessica and had a relationship with Jessica over the phone just by calling the hospital when Larry was in there, and she was a standout to talk to, and even now a greater standout to meet and know. So Jessica, Larry and I in past episodes have talked about how we led up to COVID and whatnot. It was like, oh no moment when he was admitted. The oh my God, no, was when he was in the ICU, and you admitted him to the ICU. But before you admitted him to the ICU, what was going on in your life? Was life smooth and easy and nothing going on, or when did you know that COVID was happening?
You mean in my personal life or in the medical world?
Yeah, I mean your personal life and what you bring to work. I mean,
Larry was our second COVID patient in the ICU. He was our second COVID, my first admission, our second COVID patient. But just prior to that, obviously it was on the news, and we were all hearing about it. It affected me a little differently because my parents were in Italy, and Italy was shutting down. I was on the phone with my parents. They were asking me, they were staying out there for several months, and they were asking me if they should come home because northern Italy at the time was shutting down. And we made a collective decision as a family that they would come home, and they actually made one of the last flights back into JFK before they were quarantining people at an army base. So they were able to actually fly in and go home. And my mom recounts a story of when they were on the plane, and she asked the stewardess or the flight attendant, to say, where are we going? And she couldn't tell her until they landed. They weren't sure what they were going to do with these passengers on the plane from Italy. And so I'll tell you, though, at that time, it still felt very distant. It didn't feel like it was something that was going to become what it was for us in America, in New York, in the medical healthcare world, or as a nurse. It just wasn't even probably conceivable because we've never seen anything like that. It felt like it was over there. So that's kind of what was up. It wasn't very urgent.
So I want to give the audience a glimpse into your life. First off, you've been doing you've been nursing how long, and ICU how long?
So I've been a nurse for 23 years. I've worked my way up through the chain of nursing, if you will. I've worked every level of nursing and many jobs. ICU has been, let's see, 12, 13, at least 14, 15 years. I've been in the ICU.
From my perspective, having worked in healthcare all my life and with nurses, love nurses, can't live without them. They make me look good. But people who do intensive care nursing like you're like the Navy SEALs of nursing. You're the real deal.
I knew that's where I always wanted to be, was an ICU nurse, right? So it's like, if you can do that, you can do anything.
Absolutely.
And specifically where Larry was admitted, where I worked, I'm allowed to mention, yes or no?
Yep.
Yeah. Mount Sinai Morningside. In that particular ICU, what I loved about it was that we were a medical, surgical, trauma, neuro trauma ICU, whereas a lot of hospitals have those ICUs broken up into separate units, right? We did everything. So there, as a nurse, you were exposed to absolutely everything, from a bad train trauma to just a medical septic patient, to head trauma. So there was a lot that experience, I think, that nurses get over there, but it's the best. I mean, I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
So, again, the picture I want to paint is someone walks into your ICU first week of March. What do you see? You see a central nurses station, a lot of busy people. Everyone's in scrubs and stethoscopes. There are these glass enclosed units that are for isolation and care, and it's all serious. And there's this control. It's high tech. It's busy, but it's very controlled. There seems to be some order to it. And is that kind of what life was like before it became apocalyptic?
Oh yeah. So yeah, extremely controlled. So I wasn't only just a staff nurse in the ICU where Larry was admitted, but I was the clinical leader, if you will, ANCC of the unit. So what that meant for me was that I was in charge of that order and control, that clinical order and control. And actually, yeah, I mean, you obviously had your days and you can never anticipate true emergencies. And actually, before COVID, just being a trauma unit in New York City, we did yearly mass disaster drills.
Really?
And they were simulated, obviously, right? But as we got better at them over the years, we had a great emergency director. And we would simulate these mass disaster drills just in preparation of, a bombing or, God forbid, a 9/11 or whatever. And it was pretty intense. And even that, and I would lead that, and I was like sweating through the simulation, those yearly simulations, because it was chaotic, but it was still controlled. Like there was some form of order. There was some form of like a command center and who had vests on. So you knew who was running things, that all was practiced for a long time. But aside from that, yeah, I would say the ICU is a very well-oiled machine. And our first COVID patient that came up went into one of our negative pressure rooms, which helps to filter the air out, right? And so there was a COVID patient, but that was still very, very controlled. Like, we had one patient in the glass isolation room, and I remember the nurse who went in and set them up, and it was scary, but it was still very controlled.
Larry, let me ask you. Larry, wait. I'm still trying to set a picture here, and I want you to get in next. When Larry was admitted to the hospital in, New York City was the epicenter in the beginning. When he was admitted to the hospital in New York City, there were 23 deaths. When he was intubated 2 days later on 3/19, there were 67 deaths in New York City. Mm-hmm. By April 1st, it was over 2,000. Mm-hmm. By May 1st, it was over 15,000. So, Jessica, how long after you admitted Larry to the ICU did things get out of control, and what was going on? Just kind of recreate that for us. Used to call that hell weeks of.
Yeah, it was the hell weeks. I would say days. It was days after Larry was admitted that things went crazy. And The influx of admissions, the rapidness of deterioration of patients, not having enough isolation rooms, negative pressure rooms, right? We only had 2 in a 24-bed ICU. We only had 2 when that started.
Jess, I tell people I'm very lucky that I was the second patient, because had I been 2 weeks later, I'd be in a hallway somewhere, maybe.
Correct.
You know.
Well, yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, we filled up immediately after Larry was admitted. He was obviously significant for me because he was the first person that I was in full PPE and remember like going in to settle him and admit him. And I think I recount somewhere in all my conversations about this that I remember distinctively for myself closing the door, the glass door of the room. Obviously I was in full head to toe PPE, but Larry at that time was not intubated. So essentially he was breathing on a BiPAP machine, which forces air into the lung and forces air out. And so essentially he was aerosolizing this virus in the air that I was in the room. And it was the first time I remember thinking that I actually could get this not knowing what it was, and that I could die, right? Because I didn't know what it was. We didn't know what it was. At the time Larry was admitted, I would say there was a palpable fear in the unit in terms of like, we didn't understand it. We didn't understand how fast, why patients were coming in so fast, why they were deteriorating so fast. Even things simple like, picking up the phone without gloves at the nurse's station. You wondered, am I going to get COVID that way? Like that was the level of like uncertainty for us. But Larry was the first time I remember feeling, because our first COVID patient, I believe, was intubated when he came up to us. Right. And so it's very different when you're dealing with someone that can talk and, like I said, aerosolizing this virus in the room, and you've got a mask on. And at the time, too, I think, if I recall, I try not to think about it all too much, but if I can recall, I think there was a lot of mixed messaging from hospital administration at the time about how to protect ourselves. I remember, and this is not a knock to anybody, because I think we all just did the best we could. But I remember a lot of nurses at the time putting masks on before it was recommended globally to do that. And I remember being called to a huddle, if you will, by administration, and them telling us that we should not wear masks because we were going to scare the patients. We were going to scare people that and so we were told not to wear masks. And obviously, the nurses got very upset and whatever, people just did what they wanted. But that was the messaging. And then it was like a couple days later and they were like, oh, well, we don't have enough masks. You can wear bandanas or something around, please. And then I think everyone caught on real quick about the fact that we were going to die. So they wanted to give us masks, but
it's like the air raid drills when we were kids, right?
It was
climb under your desk, you'll be fine.
It was an unreal, surreal kind of unfolding, and I liken it to a war. It was just it was a bomb that went off immediately, and it was pure chaos. It was just pure chaos. It was just patients deteriorating. And I would say, in hindsight, looking back, the first wave of COVID was really only the time that was significant. I would say between March and somewhere midsummer, that was the first wave was sustained that way. The second one was a little different. Obviously, we had more knowledge and we were dealing with it for a while, but that first wave, I don't know if I can even find English words to really describe what happened.
So I'm a third party calling every day, every other day to find out about Larry. And before I ever spoke to Jessica, for 5 or 6 phone calls, I spoke to other people, and it was an air raid, a real air raid. It was fear, apprehension, exhaustion. Everybody sounded like they were, victims of war themselves, and which made me want to talk to them. Like, how are you? What are you doing? Are you sleeping? Are you, because these obviously they're undergoing a lot. And then one day I call and I get the head nurse, Jessica, and it's like, "Hey, Dr. Cush, how you doing? What can I do for you today?" It's like, what the hell is going on here? What is wrong with it? Either she's nuts, oblivious, or she is like General Patton. Well, I figured that out real quick. And really what happened soon after was I called to tell Jessica they're going to deliver some pizza and some ice cream later on. She said, "Oh, Dr. Cush, you don't have to do that." And I said, "No, I have to do this because if you knew Larry Kelly," she said, "Oh, no, I know Larry Kelly. I admitted him." So you admitted him, and there was a conversation. And all I know of the conversation is that you described him as being fit and tan.
Oh God, this is going to come back to haunt me the rest of my
For
life.
my age.
Yeah, well, yeah, for you. Tell me what
All right,
that
I was very emotional at the time. Okay.
Right. So I want to hear each of your versions of what that. Give me a minute on what that conversation was when you were admitting.
Oh Jesus! I mean, God, sweet Jesus, nobody lets me live this down. Okay, so. All right, can I put this in context, because Larry likes to take it out of context. Okay. Here's why I said that. And actually, I'm going to tell you a little story behind it. So Larry comes in, and I think, Larry, you just came back from Florida from a vacation. So you were tan. I will say fit for your age. And I think that's how I described you. Let me clarify. You did not appear to be somebody that was morbidly obese, that had a lot of comorbidities. Whether you did or not, I didn't know, versus, things like maybe diabetes or some other medical. I'm just saying, from visual, right? You came in and you looked healthy, right? And I think why that
incredibly sexy.
Okay.
That was not in the chart. Not in the chart.
Not in the chart. However,
Not my chart.
yeah, I did not write that to the president. But I seriously, why it was significant, even though Larry likes to make fun of that all the time. It's significant because of how fast he deteriorated in front of my eyes with COVID, right? It wasn't like, at the time, I think we were hearing like, oh, if you have comorbidities, if you have lung problems, if you can't breathe, if you already have immunosuppression or these other things, you're at high risk. Well, Larry didn't look like that to me when he came in. And so when he came in, and then to see him, what I call pretty much half dead in 2 days, stuck with me. And actually, I wrote that in a letter to the president of the hospital and hospital leadership. And I don't remember even why now I wrote that. I don't remember when I wrote it or why I wrote it.
That came up on my timeline a couple of weeks ago.
I don't remember why I did that, but it was significant because it was the first time it was like, okay, this is not the picture of what they're telling us the person who gets COVID looks like, A. B, this person, for all intents and purposes, who doesn't have a lot of comorbidities, is literally dying in front of my eyes. Right. But our introduction was really just, I was in my internal probably world, feeling a lot of fear, but still doing my job, which you get to know how to do as a trauma nurse. You just put the thing on. And Larry, getting to know him now and his humor and what he's about was nothing like that when I met him. You were still kind of, trying to be jovial, but there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of and I remember, just you asking me if I was going to help you breathe and telling you that I was going to take your blood. And I think it was even during that time you had gotten a call while I was with you that your daughter had COVID. Right? I was standing in the room when you got that phone call, and you just changed, immediately changed. everything. It just changed. Yeah, I mean, it was intense. And I think it was intense because you were the first person that really, in my view, was not the picture of what we were getting on the news, if you will. And I was like, how did this happen? Like, how is this happening? It was surreal.
Larry, what do you remember the conversation when you were admitted, when she's taking you in, asking you those medical questions?
I think I told this to Jess months and months later, but when I was in rehab, just jump to there. When I was lying on my back and couldn't move from the neck down, is when George Floyd was killed on TV, and I can't breathe became like a catchphrase, and I was lying there in rehab going, oh, that's exactly what I said. But George Floyd ran into who he ran into. And I ran into Jessica. And I remember being in rehab, like getting very emotional that I was lucky enough to run into somebody who helped me breathe instead of, George Floyd. But that's, Jack, it was a hard time. Everything happened so fast. I was, when there was all these doctors in attendance over the top of me. They're going to vent me. They're going to vent you. I don't even know what that means. I don't even know. I'm terrified. And she's right. I was terrified. But the hardest part for me, and I talked to a lot of patients that have had open heart surgery, blah, blah, blah. I talked to a lot of people. People tell me their health problems now, like I have some sort of magic bullet. But to give myself over to the professionals was really hard for me, was really to say, I really hope you guys know what the hell you're doing. And just to go, okay, you can put me out, but that's so hard. And for me, because I sort of like to, keep control of my life.
Control freak? No. Not you.
So Jessica, you took him in, he went on BiPAP. You left, would you say he was stable or unstable at that moment?
Yeah, he was sick. Obviously, prior to me leaving, he required BiPAP. And for people that don't understand what that is, we'll just call it like an external kind of intubation, if you will. It's supporting your breathing. It's the last line, if you will, before you get an airway put down your tube. So he was struggling to breathe, and he required that. If I recall, I feel like the hemodynamics were stable, but there was some labored accessory muscle breathing that was concerning enough.
So he's working hard at breathing. You go home, you're off for you come back 2 days later.
I remember prior to me leaving, and again, you have to remember that I never had one specific patient because I was running the clinical side of the ICU. So if there were 24 rooms, I was in 24 rooms.
Right.
I was in 24 rooms, right? And so I was making my rounds before I was leaving, and he had glass doors, and I remember going in. No, I'm sorry, I didn't go in. I stood outside the room and I gave him like a thumbs up, like, you okay? He had your phone. He had his phone, which you can't talk on the phone when you're on BiPAP. Okay. But whatever. He had his phone and he was in the room and he was settled at that point. Yes. And I went home. I was off for 2 days, which I'll just give you, I don't remember now if it was just right before. I want to say maybe right after that, when I had 2 days off. I was in every single day for at least 6-7 days straight. Like I was going in on my days off. I didn't have a lot of time off after that, but yeah, I went home and I came back, and as a charge nurse, you get report on the whole floor. So I got report, you walk around to every room, and I got report, and I was stunned, to say the least, when I came back to see the condition that Larry was in. I was speechless.
Yeah.
And it was probably at that time that I was like, I know saying to myself, like, I can't curse on this podcast, right? So I'll be careful. What is COVID? What
Yeah.
is this? What is this? Because he looked like, one of my patients who had been septic for 4 weeks, who we couldn't, sepsis is obviously lethal, right? And but usually it's like you watch it's not this fast. And within 2 days of me coming back, he was intubated on multiple life-saving drips, and I was shocked.
So you quickly figured out this is a uncontrollable, unknown monster. What happens internally in the ICU and the staff? How do you guys get it together and know what your marching orders are for tomorrow?
We didn't. And I'm glad I told you about our mass casualty drills, because I would say to people that would listen, whoever was listening at the time, that this was, with a mass casualty incident, right? Or when you're preparing for something like that in the hospital, it ends, right? Like you have a short duration of influx and chaos and whatever, but it's over.
Right.
And
go to lunch.
This was a sustained mass casualty incident for, I think that's why I said the 8 weeks were hell weeks, for about 2 months straight, like a nonstop mass casualty incident. And by that, I mean the number of admissions that were deteriorating so quickly. And I'm talking ages between 40 and up, not your comorbidity elderly patients. It was 40-year-olds, no comorbidities, just unexplainable. We didn't have any rhyme or reason why room A wasn't surviving and room B was. We couldn't figure that out. We didn't know. It was mayhem. And at the time, we were simultaneously, aside from what we were doing, the hospital was trying to figure out, how do I get supplies in? We were changing rooms so that every single room was converted to a negative pressure room. You can imagine that. I mean, that alone is unbelievable. And that was simultaneously happening. It was, do we have enough pumps? Where do we put these pumps? Nurses were terrified to go into the room. But there was a duty and a call to receive these patients that came up. Any order or control that we had was out the window. And I think it was just natural instinct. And I think it was during that time that all hierarchy kind of just dissolved. There was no like, oh, you're the chief trauma surgeon. Oh, you're the chief neurosurgeon. No, it was like, we are healthcare workers. And we are all going to figure this out together. And nurse, doctor, nursing attendant, housekeeper, all these people, it didn't matter. It was like, if you're a hand, if you're a body, if you have a thought, if you have whatever, we are collectively going to just figure this out. It was chaos. And I remember walking through, we have double doors to the ICU. There's no glass. And when you open the doors, they open automatically. And I remember walking in, and I think it's on the film because I wore a GoPro, you just see equipment and like just massive pumps and equipment, everything all over the place. And you see just people running. So my shifts consisted of just like 14 plus hours straight of running.
Yeah. Tell about the garbage.
So, at that time, obviously, all elective surgeries stopped. So we weren't doing all that stuff. So if you were a physician of any kind, a lot of them were taking over attending roles, right, in the ICU, because the patients were just too much for one medicine attending to handle. So there was a neurosurgeon. I'm going to give him a shout out, actually, Dr. Neo, who was one of my favorites. He was young and just really smart and very kind to the nurses, but he was in a room. He was one of the medical attendings now, right? Because he wasn't operating. And so he was covering patients in the medical surgical ICU. And he was in a room, and I remember the room. It was in the surgical ICU, and the garbage was overflowing. And so, at that time we were so aware of like, where do we put our PPE and donning and doffing and all this stuff? It was just a lot. And he was in there and I knocked on the glass door and I pointed to the garbage and I said, change the garbage. We have nowhere to change our PPE. Change the garbage. And he looked at me and he did it. He changed the garbage, took the garbage out. He put the new bag in, without question, he did it. And like that's the kind of level of hierarchy breakdown there was. And he knew how significant that was for us because we had to go in the room and like have somewhere to put this PPE. But he changed the garbage, this, great neurosurgeon that he was. So,
I always said, Jess, that, through my whole experience, I have my respect for nurses and even people under you, the aides that attended me.
Yeah.
What they do the toughest jobs. And I mean, they had to attend everything to me. And I was going back to me liking to be in control. I don't like people having to wait on me, and so that was really hard for me. And but I was a good patient, I was told, because I was always grateful and thank you. I'm so sorry you have to do that, but what you guys do all through it's just, and especially during COVID.
And I think about, actually, you bring that up, and just a shout out quickly to all those people who are nursing attendants and the housekeepers and all those people, obviously the attention was on healthcare professionals, but think about how many of them had to go in those rooms and also didn't know what was going on, and they weren't taking care of the patients, but they were facing every fear that we were facing, and they did it. It was a team. It was just a team. It was a team across the board. There wasn't nurse, doctor, aide, housekeeper. It was just, we were there to fight. And look, some nurses were terrified and didn't want to do it and couldn't do it. And I don't judge that. I mean, there were some of them had medical conditions, or I have friends at the time who are my very, very close nurse friends, who I'm still friends with today. I won't tell you the name of our group on text message, but they know who they are. And they had brand new babies. They were breastfeeding in the hospital and going home to an infant and coming in every day and facing this and freaking out. I mean, we would fight over, it's funny. I'll tell this one story quickly. Can I say her name?
Yes.
I mean, she wouldn't care.
First name.
Yeah. All right. So we have there's about 7 of us. We're in this group called the Bitches. Okay. It's all nurses. It's all ICU nurses.
And they're running the hospital. Don't you worry.
Yeah. But wait a minute. We started this group. It saved my life during COVID, because it was in this group that we were able to vent and cry and be sad and be angry about what was happening and all this stuff. And everybody was super supportive. And there were 2 nurses in that group, I think, that had left our ICU, but still part of our group, who weren't living what we were living. But Julia, she organized how to get us PPE and raised like thousands of dollars for a food fund and an Uber fund for all the nurses in the ICU. Like, this was happening behind the scenes, like that was my group, and we're still very, very, very close. And so it was like a venting session, and those of us living it were horrified, and those of them who were not, but trying to support us, were amazing. And that's how they helped. And so Jenna had just had a baby, and she was breastfeeding. Her and Beth, they were 2 nurses who just had babies. And I remember, because I was the clinical leader, I like to say that, of the unit, she was pissed off because they had changed the gowns at that time, and not on purpose. I think the supply was just out, right? And they were really like permeable, if you will. They weren't like our other gowns, and she was scared. And she was, and it translated into anger at me, like she started yelling at me in the hallway about the gown quality, right? The PPE. And I was like yelling back, going like, I don't control this. Like, I can't help this. And I remember Dr. Wedderburn, who you know, who did your surgery, kind of got in the middle of the two of us. And you know, I said, here, you deal with her because she's yelling at me and I have no control. And he did. But it was that kind of like intense environment that it was like, I don't know who to yell at. This is unacceptable. I'm scared. This is not enough. And like, you just yelled at anyone that was around you. And I often say during that time, there was no filter. There was no professional filter anymore. Like, you know, if you're in a professional setting, it's like, gone are the 1950s, 60s, 70s. Okay, doctor, would you like to sit down? Like, no, we never did that. But I'm saying, like, you know, gone are the days of we're like, oh, can you get this blood? Or do you have time? It was like, dude, change the garbage, give me the drip, hurry up. Like, everyone was yelling at each other and you didn't take it personal.
Jess, when you earlier you made the analogy of being in war, and I say constantly that a global pandemic is exactly what you talk about. We've seen so many movies and we've talked to so many Vietnam vets who have a hard time talking about what they went through, that you needed that support group. It's like vets getting together with other vets and
Correct.
having a drink. Amity Hall was your gathering place.
Yes, it was.
Amity Hall was your gathering.
The
And
PTOH. Yeah.
You know, and I understand it too, because it's why Jack and I are doing this podcast is, you know, Miracle Larry has a story, but everybody does. And COVID, I think the way to get through what we went through is to talk about it, is to talk it out and just
It's true. But I find that you're not wrong, but I find that you can't talk about it with people unless they understand what it was. It's very hard to explain to somebody who doesn't understand
absolutely
what it was like. And so that's why I think our bitches group, ICU nurses, is still intact. And ironically, we all left the ICU, not working in the ICU, but we all left that ICU. We've all done different things. I'm still in the ICU, and a couple of them are, and some for better, doing awesome things, CRNAs, whatever, but we're still together. And I think it's because, and actually I'll say during the second wave, I'm jumping ahead a little bit.
Go ahead.
We had a little bit of lull in between the first and second, like things calmed down, and then we had like a surge again. And I'll never forget Adelie, who's now the ANCC in the ICU where you were. She's my dear friend. She's killing it over there, and she's in our bitches group. She looked at me and said, all she said was this feels like March. And that's all she had to say to me for me to understand what she meant. Now, if you say that to anybody else, they would not understand what that means. And I looked at her and I said, I know. And it wasn't as bad as March. It was bad. It was not as bad as March. But all she had to do was look at me and say, this feels like March.
Jessica, I listened to all your podcasts and your many videos and the documentaries that you were involved in. They're wildly inspirational, and so always a treat to talk to you. But the one thing I got from those was your line of calm through chaos, and it was chaos. And in the first 6 months, there were 2,000 healthcare workers who died from COVID. Yeah. How did you deal with that as far as a home life and going home and hugging your kids and that sort of thing? What did you do?
So, I mean, I think I'm a little different than a lot of people. So I don't want to speak for everybody on this, because I think everybody handled it differently in their personal lives. For myself, nursing has always been a calling. There was no question in my mind. It was like a burning building, right? The hospital was the burning building. And I felt like I needed to run there. That was just me. I can't speak for everyone, but that was just I felt like I needed to run there, knowing that I had a home, but I knew what my calling was, right? And so at the time of March, actually, my husband Paul got COVID
Oh no.
right around the time Larry had it. And he was home, and I remember he was working and he didn't feel good. And he bought I said, go buy a thermometer at the deli or whatever. And he bought a thermometer, and he was taking his temperature every hour and calling me. And finally, when it hit, like, I think it was 100.4 or something, I think maybe it was 101. I don't remember, but we both made a decision. You got to get out of there, because we didn't want to take the risk of like infecting anybody. And so he came home, and obviously we got him tested, and he was positive, and he was quarantined to our bedroom. And my, what was she, 10, 11 at the time, 10 maybe, Francesca, our daughter, had to take care of him because I went to the hospital. And I couldn't see myself sitting home, but at the same time, you know, I have a picture somewhere of her like doing the dishes on a chair. She's standing on a chair, like doing the dishes, and like giving daddy food through the door. And he and I would FaceTime. And I got a pulse ox for him on his finger, and I wanted to see what his oxygen was. And I had a number in my head when I would get him to the hospital if I had to, but I told him otherwise he wasn't coming to the hospital. So like that was simultaneously happening when it broke out, but there was no way that I felt like I couldn't be at the hospital at the same time. So I was kind of doing both.
So
Yes, I you know, my head's a little different in terms of, you said, you know, it's hard to talk about it. You know, all those people banging pots and giving all that respect to healthcare workers. And then 6 months later, it's like, let's move on. And I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't, you know, I joke, I'm sort of like Elie Wiesel with the Holocaust. You know, there's a part of me that if we don't learn from what happened, it's going to happen again, that old adage. And I can't talk. I can't even listen to somebody badmouth their doctor. I can't sit next to somebody who says, my doctor doesn't know what he's doing. I can't listen. I walk away. I just, you know, what doctors and you guys put in every day, and it's only to save lives, should never be forgotten. You guys.
Yeah. And actually, this is a good segue into just mentioning that during that time, during those first 8 hell weeks, a colleague of ours died, 2 actually. One at our sister hospital in Mount Sinai West, and our X-ray technician died. And that one was hard. So when the nurse died, he was a manager at Mount Sinai West, and we got word that he died from COVID, and he was helping the staff, obviously. We took a moment of silence. We gathered everybody in the middle, and we told them what happened. And that I had nurses who had panic attacks during the huddle, who had to leave the unit. They were terrified, and obviously we felt that it became like so real, like I could die from this. But then we had an X-ray tech who worked in our unit, and he was older and probably didn't understand the need for proper PPE. He just never, there were a lot of things he didn't understand. And the day before he left the ICU, I called his manager and I said, he shouldn't be in the ICU. It's not safe. And
so for the audience, an X-ray tech to an ICU nurse is a little bit like an executive who has a secretary outside his door. I mean, arm in arm, you're together every day. You're personal friends, your work friends, you're in the trenches together. So that kind of loss had to be shocking. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he never reported to work, and someone checked on him and he died.
So let's go quickly if we can. We're going to go fast forward a few weeks. Larry's not doing good. You know, well, we got to say, you know, Jess, you and your team, one of the first to give steroids. Larry got steroids. You're one of the first to give Actemra, tocilizumab, an IL-6 inhibitor. You were one of the first to actually flip him.
Yeah.
Describe what that proning and flipping is.
Can I say something before she describes that?
Yeah.
I give you lots of kudos for the proning, because I know that you were a big advocate. Prone them.
Well, here's the deal. I'm not going to belabor this point, but Jack, how do I even go through this? It's like,
Start with just the decision. You were an expert at it. You had published on it. You taught other
right.
people how to do it.
So, like, let's be honest, proning is not invented by Mount Sinai. It's been around since the 1970s, right? Like,
Right,
it's a long-standing thing. It's had its place in medicine and then lost its place and had its place and lost its place, right? And so proning is essentially just flipping someone onto their belly, because the thought is that they get more oxygenation to those alveoli, which is where your gas exchange takes place. That's the medical part. So ironically, about a year and a half earlier, our team in Mount Sinai Morningside ICU, shout out to us because we really did a great job. We did simulation and we developed this whole policy, and it was published, and it was International Nursing Magazine, and it was a national talk, and our team did a wonderful job creating a policy around how to prone critically ill patients. And we're talking about patients that are not stable, have airways, are hemodynamically not stable. There's a lot that can go wrong. So there's a lot into it. And I want to tell a story, but it's so inappropriate, so I'm not going to do that. So
Self-editing. That's okay.
I'm sorry. I have a little bit of Larry Kelly in me.
Is it about me?
No.
Okay, good. I was going to say, go ahead.
No. I digress. So anyway, so Larry, the day I came back, I'll never forget this. So he had there's certain reasons why you flip a patient, right? Poor oxygenation. We can't ventilate or oxygenate them. We're doing everything we can. We're out of moves, essentially, right? You have an airway already. What are we going to do? And I remember sitting with Dr. Gopal. He was an ICU attending. Dr. Mohanraj, who everyone knows, an ICU attending. Dr. Shapiro, who was our medical director, and sitting in like a little huddle. And I was the nurse, and we were sitting there together talking about what we were going to do with Larry, because he was on, like, I think 90, 80, 100% of oxygen already on a ventilator, and his blood gases weren't good, and we didn't know what to do. But he didn't meet all the criteria, I think, at the time to prone somebody, because we were still going off we didn't know what COVID was. There was no criteria for COVID. So we were going off different criteria. And we decided at that moment not to prone him. We had like a little huddle about, should we do it? Shouldn't we do it? Should we do it? Like, it was all discussion. We didn't do it. And then I think you got worse. And I went home, and when I came back, you were actually proned. You were flipped on your belly. And that saved a lot of people's lives in the ICU. And I'm just really proud of our team, because we were ahead of the curve. We were prepared to do this intervention, because we had practiced it, we had worked on it, we had a policy. And in fact, we were like, the sounding board for a lot of people across the country. As a result, I was getting calls from Colorado, California, Florida, nurses calling me saying, teach me how to prone quickly over the phone. And I was walking them through how to do this on the phone, because they had never done prone. And to people who are in medicine, I hate this, because they disregard proning, like, it's no big deal. Like ORs, they do it all the time. Yeah, but that patient's hemodynamically freaking stable. I'm talking about a patient who is about to die or morbidly obese on multiple hemodynamic drips with an airway, and we're trying to flip them, right? And so with lines and whatever. And so it was pretty amazing, but we quickly adapted that process, and I think it saved a lot of people. Believe it or
Jack,
not.
there's always a need in me to, because we talk about very difficult and painful stuff I do believe a part of my survival is my sense of humor and the way I see the world. But I just have to jump to when I went back to visit that day, which to this day is still one of the most emotional days of my life. But Dr. Jennifer Fung, when she said to Mr. Kelly, she goes, I was part of your proning team. Can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She goes, what's the significance of your tattoos on your back? I'll never forget. That was the question she wanted to ask.
He likes
She
to
said they knew
gamble.
they had meaning. She knew they had meaning. She just wanted to know.
Jessica, you saw the tattoos. What's the tattoos on his back?
It's poker cards. Right? And I thought, and that's when I was like, oh, this guy's cool, you know? And I remember seeing that. Yeah. He has poker cards on his back.
So this podcast is called the Miracle Larry. This could be called the Lucky Larry podcast, because luck is when preparation meets opportunity. That's Jessica.
Jack, remind me when we're off video to tell you the story I want to tell that I can't tell on here.
All right.
Jess, you have to come back. Please, you have to come back, because
we got to end with one more. We can end at this point. We'll come back in the next episode and we'll talk about reunions and how these guys get together after Larry wakes up and walks out of the hospital. But Larry, we just had a reunion. You just got 50-year reunion. What was that like, meeting all your classmates? And there were hundreds of them, each of whom knew your story and were moved by it back then. What was it like to meet them now, this weekend?
Jack, it was my whole life at certain points is very surreal. That I'm still not totally convinced I'm not dead. I always have that big question mark, because it was weird, Jack. The love that was shown was just it was overwhelming, and it's almost like I teased Jan, who wrote the article for the Times, that I'm the only person I know who has read their obituary who's still alive, and all the things people wrote about me on Facebook and other venues, and but because they all thought I was dead. So they all said good stuff, So I read this stuff, and
they were lying.
I was like, oh my God.
We're selective.
But going back to the people that have known me since, like you, Jack, since kindergarten, it's Jess, it's beyond words. It's beyond words. It's it was. We'll talk about it again when I can put it in words. I didn't expect this question at the end of this. There's a lot of thoughts that are running around my head all the time, and I just want to say one light note. Jess earlier talked about early times of COVID, grabbing the phone and not knowing if you were going to get it from the phone. Well, when I was conscious and at the third spot, before I went into rehab, I was sent downtown. I was shipped around, I was sent downtown to this new unit. And I had lost my Movado watch, my wallet with all my credit cards, my diamond earring, my everything, my cell phone, and all my clothes. And I thought,
sound like a gigolo, but go ahead.
I thought that son of a bitch Jessica stole she stole my stuff. She stole my stuff.
She didn't think you were going to live.
I found out later. I was so early.
Yeah.
They burned it all.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah. They burned it all. The stuff
Get
that was
the hell out of here. I didn't even
because
know
they didn't know how it spread. I was
Holy
early. They didn't know how it spread.
I didn't know that.
Everybody's belongings that came in. I'm thinking, those nurses, they got my Movado watch. They got my cell phone.
You were a gigolo.
Well, indescribable is our guest, Jessica Montanaro. Jessica, thank you for taking the time and recanting this great history together. So,
will you come back?
Maybe.
Okay.
Maybe.
Yeah.
We have to talk to her agent. All right, we're going to.
Yeah, you can do that. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Jess. Love you.
Love you.